Despite the clock, it is good afternoon, everybody. I guess the first thing is how do you follow that? And I was just sitting there reflecting. I am CIfA's antidote to fun, and there is an element of back to basics here. Usually the slides I put up are meaningless drivel. There's some significance on this one. Two things. Mark's original, I'm not. The future is a foreign country. They do things differently there. We all know that change is inevitable. It's also often, and certainly in this case, for many people, very threatening. Just pick up on Mark's talk, some very valid points. I wouldn't say in this case that the only thing to fear is fear itself, but I would flag up that fear, if we don't keep it on a short rein, can be very damaging. And I think many of you possibly would agree that fear was a factor in the decision that led to Brexit. Well, let me put the other side of the coin. Fear of the consequences will be damaging if we over-obsess about them. So just with that little introduction, the second thing, from listening today, one word I'd take away from it, and uncertainty. And again, we all know uncertainty is corrosive, but it's unavoidable in this context. I've got 15 minutes. I've got the privilege of being towards the end of the conference and at the back of this session. Many of my points have been made much more eloquently by others already, inside and outside this room. I'll take you through, though, and just name check a few of the issues that we have. And I usually go backwards with this thing, is that? Brilliant. Specific threats. This was a slide that was certainly prepared before the events of this week. Before, for instance, Scottish independence, if it ever went off the agenda, certainly came back expressly on it. So these are four broad areas that we've highlighted. And I want to say, I do understand why in the talks earlier, we had talks referring to Little Englanders, referring to English provisions, whether United Kingdom, and there are in some cases, subtly different issues, in other cases, markedly different issues between England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. And at the moment, we're all in it together. So if we talk about different administrations, let's remember it's a nuanced picture. I'm not going to read everything. We're relatively short on time. Could I just name check a couple of things? Environmental protection. It started with Rob and Nick quite rightly identifying our concerns, particularly about environmental impact assessment and strategic environmental assessment. Now, I think as Kenny said, quite rightly, it's to me inconceivable that the Great Repeal Bill, designed to maintain the status quo, will not leave us with the environmental protection framework we have now. However, the chilling words to me is when government says the Great Repeal Act will hold the status quo. In subsequent parliaments, we will investigate ways to improve and streamline the systems. Sends a dread shiver back down my neck because I'm not a betting man. If I was, I would put money on the way in which environmental protection will move in legislative and regulatory terms over the next few years. And that is the grave worry that we are vulnerable without the backdrop of European directive. Another interesting issue, I'll just stick on that for a second. As a lawyer, I am a common lawyer. I'm brought up in the UK system, quite different from our colleagues as lawyers and other professionals on the continent. A much more purposive interpretation. And one of the major problems we've got, even when we have environmental protection maintained in our legislative system is that we lose the interpretation of the European courts, and that is quite significant. There has been legal discussion about codifying statutorily European case law. That will be difficult. It's very different from UK case law. So there are real challenges there that I just pick up. Funding, you've talked about, education, agriculture and other areas. Skills and movement of labour. Just a problem here. We've been talking to governments about free movement of labour. There's some acceptance that skilled labour will have to move, but government tends to equate skills with salary. And I think all of you know that in a profession that's notoriously poorly paid, that is an equation which does not hold good in the historic environment sector. So again, real challenges for us. I'm just going to have a drink of water because of my cold. Collaborative research, we've also heard a reasonable amount already this morning, so I'll move quickly through. General threats, and I've used this a lot. Those of you who've heard me talk before know I'm a bit of the equivalent of Eeyore in CIfA from Winnie the Pooh. I've gone round telling a tale of woe for several years about how environmental protection, the planning system, is being dismantled. I think it's spending 2 nights with Mark. I've had a bit of an epiphany. I know I've been unwell. I'm standing before you today as CIfA's Mr. Motivator. The first message I've got for you is whatever we think about the Brexit decision, we have got to be positive. I talked to Ian Barnes, who was telling me of course, former MOD archaeologist, the management of change and a lot of change in MOD that's happened. And the cycle of reaction to change, denial, resentment, aggression, comes round to acceptance and embracing change. Some people can go straight across the top. Most of us go through that cycle. I fear, and when I listen to the debate, that fear is to some extent reinforced, that some of us are stalled on denial. I would say that is not going to help us. We are where we are and we've got to deal with it. I've identified general threats there. Again, they've been identified during the day. Could I pick up on expert erosion? It's a quick phrase, really, to pick up on the points that have already been made about the public disenchantment with expert opinion, the influence of experts, which isn't exclusive to Brexit, but it played a significant part. And there's a dichotomy here. There's the view that why should we, the public, be dictated to in our views by an intellectual elite? We've had discussions about what that is. Let me say the opposite is unhelpful. It's the we've all gone to hell in a handcart view. I think H.L. Mencken said democracy is the notion that the common people know what they want and should get it good and hard. Now, that sort of approach, which does seep through from professionals, people who've worked hard honing their expertise, is extremely unhelpful. Now, the good thing about being at the end of the conference, I, for instance, sat in on an entertaining, and I don't say that pejoratively, Richard Newman, an old hand. And he was saying, I don't agree with Jan, we shouldn't be humble. We should be assertive. We should get out and tell them we are the experts. Now, as a lawyer, my answer to that is I agree with both of them. You know, the good book says, yeah, to everything there is a season, a time to keep silent, a time to talk. I think when we engage with the public, we have got to be humble. We are going to lose the battle. If not, we've not already lost it, we're going to lose the battle. When we are talking about things like Brexit, we have got to be positive and bold. So moving with that slight pep talk, many of you have seen this slide already. I put it in because I liked it. Very easy responses we've got there. Retain environmental legislation. The key question, to be honest, is how do we do that? And in my view, we have got to demonstrate, as we do with our expertise, we have got to demonstrate the value of it to politicians, to the public and other stakeholders. And that's a tedious job, but the one thing I'd say as experts, every time we open our mouth, we pledge our credit. If you get it wrong, if you overstate your case, you will lose credibility. When I started legal work, some of you are older might remember the Romans in Britain trial, 1981, and I was the very junior member of the legal team, and I remember the famous QC became a well-known High Court judge. He got it wrong in that case, and he said afterwards, he compared being a lawyer to being like a lady of the night. The only thing you've got to keep you going is your good name, and there's a lot to be said for that. Compensate for lost funding, we've talked about that. Free movement of accredited archaeologists. Now, that's where we see an opportunity to insert accreditation in the government consideration, but remembering that we're a niche market. The general point at the end, archaeology cultures are different and all Europeans are migrant. Again, look at the different administrations. Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland have managed to pick up what's distinctive. It's been politically something that's been pushed. England, we haven't done that very well. Let's just move on. Response. I've done be bold. Warren Buffett, when other people are fearful, you must be bold. When other people are bold, you must be fearful. We have to be positive. We have to embrace change. I'm going to come back to the narrative in a moment. But I do think it's important to see the big picture as well as the fine detail. We tend in advocacy to get involved in discussion of subclauses, in particular wording. If we lose sight of the narrative behind it, we've lost the game already. And recognise opportunities. Why I put Dead Poets Society up. I'll have another drink so I can continue speaking to you. The late and great Robin Williams, if you remember the scene, he told his pupils to stand on the desk and he said, when you think you understand something, you must look at it from a different angle. And that leads into the discussion of cooperation with our colleagues on the continent of Europe. And I do remember, I've got very much in mind that not all those colleagues on the continent of Europe are in the European Union. So that's an issue. But let me just flag up one point where I think that we haven't engaged particularly effectively in the past. We've heard from Sophie and Manuel about what EAA is doing, and Pete, Jerry Waite, Kate Geary and others have done a lot of work. I'd say to some extent at a strategic level in marrying the two organisations and cooperating. And ground level what's happening? Well, with the advocacy work that Rob and I do, if you'd asked me 12 months ago, do I engage with the continent of Europe? I'd say yes. I'd say that because we answer European consultations. Where on the conveyor belt one comes out, do I ever pick up the phone or email a colleague on the continent for a view on what the position is? No. I give an English view because when in the European Union we are putting an English case so that any legislation acts and functions for the benefit of United Kingdom, be it English, Scottish, Welsh practitioners. Now, you may say, well, if we're withdrawing from the stage, why do we need greater cooperation? And the answer to that I'd give is this, that I think in the sector, we are very good at identifying problems. We're not so good at providing solutions. That really is the difficult bit. And when we provide solutions, what we tend to do is we recycle the familiar. And when you're dealing with a problem, when you recycle the familiar, you're usually tweaking something that's already failed. What we really need to do is think laterally, think about the ways that people do things differently. We may not embrace them fully, but we have to think about that. And I could give you two quick examples. Community infrastructure levy, we thought when it came out as a planning tariff. You can't call it, the government doesn't want to call it a tax in Westminster. It's a tax that dare not speak its name. We thought it might have benefits for the historic environment. It hasn't. It has generally been an unmitigated disaster. People don't understand its purpose. It can't be called a tax. People don't understand the mechanisms by which it applies, and they don't understand where the money goes. And the truth is the money has hardly gone anywhere. This money collected from developers, effectively a development tax. Now, why haven't we been talking to colleagues on the continent and elsewhere where alternative forms of funding, this is not a usual form for us, are more commonplace? We haven't done that. Now, if we did that in future, that might help. Also, my particular bugbear, automatic permission for the new English idea of permission in principle, also being floated in Scotland, but they've not got it yet. I was at a meeting with the Department for Communities and Local Government with Liz Dyson, a colleague, curator for Kent, and we were talking about the need with the system where permission is automatically conferred to front load. So all our archaeological work has to go at the front. Liz Dyson helpfully said, well, I worked in France. That happens, but in France it's a very different system. So we have to understand what our colleagues do to move things forward, because of course DCLG are very happy if you say front load the system to say, yeah, go ahead. But they don't understand the wider background. So there are opportunities to take, and I would very much suggest we need to take them. Another late actor, sadly, Pete Postlethwaite in Brastoff. You know, he had a mega rant about the dismantling of the coal mining industry. What I'd say to you is we cannot engage, we can in this room, but we cannot continue to engage in rants about the wisdom or otherwise of leaving the European Union. We have to seem to be part of the solution and not part of the problem. Narrative, I think this, I didn't cooperate with Pete, but it looks very similar. It's not strictly a UK institute. We have members in a number of countries. We're not withdrawing from Europe, just from the Union, and the wider sector can make a key contribution to that transition. Big picture, just when I said the narrative, the planning system, European regulation and environmental protection are not the reasons why the UK is broke, other parts of Europe are broke. But that's what we get all the time. The planning system is being dismantled on the basis that it's environmental protection, which is causing the lack of development. Many of us take grave issue with that. Opportunities, show your age, Huey Green, opportunity knocks. Opportunities for change, we're short of time, so I'll just leave them there on the table. Advocacy, we need willingness to consider fundamental changes. We need to collect and share evidence on a wider basis. We need to pursue meaningful cooperation with other European colleagues, we're all Europeans. Stronger partnerships with other sectors, including the natural environment, and a variety of delivery mechanisms for our advocacy. Last point, Rob knows more than me about ginger archaeology. When we had contentious issues mooted by the Department for Communities and Local Government, what got us to the negotiating table, not the professional institutes, it was a 19-year-old student who put a petition on the internet that got 18,000 signatures within a week. That's what got us to the negotiating table. So, new ways of doing things. With that, thank you very much.